Oh, I've been waiting for this one. This one, do intelligence agencies run cults? Oh man, we learned so much in the years following this classic episode that, like, if we went back in time and talked to each other now about this, or the future versions of Matt and Noel went and talked to the past versions of Noel, Matt, and Ben, we would sound like crazy people.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, we already do a little bit sometimes, but this would just exacerbate that experience.
For sure. And in this case, we're discussing whether or not there's any kind of strategy to having control of a cult. Like, is there a reason that an intelligence agency could make use of a group of like-minded people that follow a single leader, or maybe a group of people? Why would you want that? And has it happened?
Well, stick around and you might just find out.
From UFOs to ghosts and government cover-ups, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is Stuff They Don't Want You to Know. I'm Matt.
And I'm Ben.
Welcome back. Guys, today, it's getting exciting.
You know, listeners can't see this right now, Matt, but you have a weird grin on, an air of mischief about, and perhaps it's just the most wonderful time of the year, which is what you and I call Halloween on this show. Mm-hmm. Or maybe you got something up your sleeves there.
Maybe. Every time Samhain comes around, I feel a little bit that way.
Ah, yes, the correct pronunciation, which we learned the hard way.
Yes. Listeners out there who also watch our videos, you know that Ben and I have tried our hand at starting one of those, what do you call them, cults? Mm-hmm. It went pretty well.
It did. You can actually see some of the results in a video series that we did, one episode in particular, wherein, Matt, you as the cult leader have sent me out to proselytize our coworkers.
Well, I will say that I was not self-appointed.
Well, you know, sometimes the Godhead just finds you, right?
That's right.
So we do have a video where we take a satirical look at some of the operations that cults use. Some of the techniques would be a better word,
sure.
Right?
How a cult begins.
Right. And how a cult grows and how it maintains loyalty, ideology, and pushes people into increasingly unusual decisions, right?
Sure.
And, you know, if you work in the law, or if you work with logistics, then you're well aware of decision trees, and how, with a little bit of forethought and with some careful puppet stringing, you can place people very easily into a situation that they would have never, ever in a million years thought they would do. And which brings us to our next side of the story here. And what's that, Matt?
Well, we're asking an interesting question here today. Do intelligence agencies run cults?
What an interesting question. Yeah, fascinating even. Now, in the United States, when we say intelligence agencies, we're talking specifically in this sense about things like the FBI and the CIA, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Central Intelligence Agency.
And we know that these alphabet agencies, specifically those two, and also the NSA, and several other of them,
sure, they
are actively monitoring groups, all kinds of individuals that they consider to be, let's say, possible threats to the national security.
Can you guys hear the finger quotations we just put around that, the air quotes? That's because national security is often vaguely defined, and increasingly so. So just for examples, what's something that these agencies would monitor?
One that you are probably aware of is the Occupy movement that happened several years ago and is still ongoing today. You can look, there's a Guardian article that we looked at about how the FBI coordinated the entire crackdown. Well, not the entire, but a large portion of the crackdown on the Occupy movement. And that's by Naomi Wolf. You can check that out.
Yeah, we've got a quotation here. Part of this that we pulled from this article for you guys to hear is, in this article in The Guardian, Naomi Wolf talks about the documents that emerged showing how closely the alphabet agencies and private sector entities cooperated, sometimes merging into a single entity known as the Domestic Security Alliance Council. Here's a quote. And it reveals this merged entity to have one centrally planned, locally executed mission. The documents, in short, show the cops and Department of Homeland Security working for and with banks to target, arrest, and politically disable peaceful American citizens. That really happened.
Yeah. Yep.
And we know that that's not the first time it happened. We know that throughout U.S. history, other groups have been, civilian groups, mind you, have been monitored by the FBI in particular, but also other government agencies.
And the FBI in particular because it's within the United States. That's why they're the agency looking at it. And we've looked at this before with COINTELPRO.
Yep.
When you look at the way that the FBI handled MLK, Martin Luther King Jr., and how they monitored his phone calls. They watched all of it, like all kinds of just spying on this guy.
Went through his mail.
Yeah, manipulating, sending him threats. Very interesting and scary. Then you've also got the Southern Christian Leadership Conference.
Right, yeah. The SCLC, as well as MLK and other members affiliated, both individuals and groups affiliated with the civil rights movement, were aggressively monitored and targeted, but they weren't the only ones. There was also what would be called the New Left, or people pushing for Irish independence, an exile group called Cuban Power, and people fighting for Puerto Rican independence, and so on. It even gets a little bit crazier than that when we're talking about monitoring, right?
Yeah, groups that you would not think would be monitored.
Try me.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Vegetarians.
Oh, the ISIS of restaurants, huh?
They're dangerous, man. More dangerous than you could ever know. Also environmentalists. And I can see the angle with environmentalists because there is the, I forget the term for it, but eco-terrorism. Yeah. I mean, that does exist. That is a real thing. But vegetarians, I'm trying to think if maybe there's an angle for Monsanto to get involved.
I wonder. That's not a bad question. We have an interesting story to point you toward. Check out the story of an informant named Anna. And Anna was asked to infiltrate things like vegan potlucks, looking for eco-terrorists, people who would be a threat to, quote unquote, national security.
That's right. I watched recently a movie on HBO. I believe it was called The East. I think that's what it's called. About eco-terrorists and this other independent agency that sends people to infiltrate them. And I wonder where some of maybe the story of Anna comes into play there.
Yeah. Now, from what we understand, the informant Anna came forward because this person may or may not be female, but clearly, I think it's female. This person is disillusioned with the strategies used by domestic intelligence agencies. If you haven't checked it out yet, check out our video about whether these guys are on the up and up and obeying the law when they do the monitoring. They certainly were not doing it during COINTELPRO.
Absolutely not.
Which is why Congress changed some of the laws. But how many of those laws got changed back? A little tidbit here. In 2002, under the Bush administration, some of those laws were rescinded in the interest of, wait for it, national security. We better not make that a drinking game.
Oh gosh,
because
I know.
Somebody's going to get alcohol poisoning. And we also know that if we're just talking about monitoring, a lot of socialist leaning religious groups that were anti-war, pacifist groups have been targeted. In short, Matt, they could target pretty much anyone they wanted. But did they actually infiltrate these groups?
Well, we're going to find out really soon after a quick word from one of our sponsors.
And we're back, and we can answer this question. In the previous part of the podcast, we talked about monitoring groups illegally. But now it's time to talk about something else, right?
Infiltration. Now, that's another thing that we've talked about several times in our video. But for this, we're talking about civilian groups and religious groups and how the FBI has infiltrated them before.
Right, yes, infiltrated them, but not just to infiltrate and surveil, not just infiltrate as an informant. There's a line that they cross. So if our question is, do intelligence agencies run cults? We know that they have certainly influenced religions. And you and I know, of course, and listeners, you know, if you've watched our video on cults, that the division between a religion and a cult is a little bit gray. Just as one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter, one person's religion is another person's cult. So we know that the FBI, CIA have used informants to enter into Weather Underground, which was a group active a few decades before our time. Listeners, some of you may remember the days of Weather Underground. We know that more recently and controversially, the FBI has placed informants in mosques in the United States. We covered this in our video, Is the FBI Manufacturing Terrorists? Why do we use that title, Matt?
Well, it's because it has to do with entrapment in one way, and then also sending informants in to try and rile up a group. Mm-hmm. So in this guy's case, Craig Montiel, he went into a mosque, and while he was doing surveillance on most of the people in one of these mosques, he was also talking to them about jihad and trying to rile everybody up. And what they did is they contacted, well, first of all, they put a restraining order on the guy.
So they said, don't come back here anymore. This is not what Islam is about.
Yeah, we are not the people you're looking for. Right, and then they also called the FBI.
Yeah, and they said, look, there's this crazy guy who is trying to bomb places and trying to get members of our mosque in there, and he's harassing people. And the FBI, you know, I can't imagine the phone call that happened between there when someone said, yeah, there's this guy who is we got a report that there may be terrorist activity at this mosque. And who reported it? The mosque. And then go, okay, well, thank you for the call. They put the phone down, heavy sigh. They pick it up and they ring and they go, Craig, the jig is up.
Get out of there.
I mean, but that has to be, that is such an important question though. And that goes to the question of infiltration versus running or influencing a cult. Because the idea here that critics of this would cite is just as you said, Matt, entrapment, you know?
Exactly. And so let's look at another place that they've infiltrated. Another topic that we've covered heavily on video recently are NGOs, non-government organizations, and the CIA. We mentioned that they send assets in to look at groups such as, Peace Corps, USAID.
Right. Yeah.
There are a lot of them, and it is sometimes with the organization's understanding that they'll be sending in an informant or an asset. An asset, yeah.
And sometimes it's without that understanding. It's just who knew that John Doe wasn't really from Everytown, Kansas?
That's so weird to me.
It happens, it happens. And, it's also part of the reason why we hear such a stink when people who are working for a Western NGO are detained in a non-Western country. Often there's this implication, whether true or not, and I think you have to go case by case basis, whether true or not, there's this implication from the capturing country that these people were not, college kids working for the Peace Corps. They were, plants from the CIA or some other intelligence agency.
I can't imagine being in that position, finding someone from an NGO who's doing something extremely suspicious, and they go, oh man, okay, this could be a CIA agent, gotta handle this carefully.
Yeah, oh man, I see, yeah, that's a really weird phone call to get to.
Right?
And then they call the CIA, the guy goes, oh, what, really? And he hangs up, he says, thank you, he hangs up the phone. He lets out a long sigh. He picks it up, dials the number and says, Craig.
Beautiful callback.
As far as we know, ladies and gentlemen, that did not actually happen. But what does happen on a regular basis is that foreign intelligence assets are also put in State Department embassies, right? We also know that there's very compelling evidence of CIA and FBI front companies and or dummy organizations, which you and I covered in some of our Gary Webb stuff, right? So these would be airline companies with names that are just so vague and boring, like Premier Executive Transportation Services. I fell asleep just reading that out loud. And Intermountain Aviation, we also know that financial organizations also operate in foreign countries, a shell company for the purpose of funneling money. So what does this all tell us?
Well, to me, it says that our initial question at the top perhaps isn't all that crazy. Maybe a government agency or a project really could involve some kind of front cult or a dummy cult.
Ah, okay.
So Ben, let's go over some of the illegal things, straight up illegal, that the CIA and FBI and or FBI have done.
Proven.
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. Let's see. Where to start?
There's a good one that I can think of.
Okay. Hit me with your best shot.
Almost started singing. MK Ultra.
That's nothing to sing about. MK Ultra, we've also done some videos on that. MK Ultra, as you know, is a blanket term for a series of related experiments which involved everything from trying to create a real-life Manchurian candidate, that would be a brainwashed assassin on command, to seeing if LSD was a truth serum.
Yeah. And just looking at how humans interact when they're on hallucinogens that way.
And I still think that one guy was assassinated. I don't think
he fell out of the window?
Yeah. I don't think he just did acid and jumped out of a window.
Yeah.
Again, that's my personal opinion, folks. That is not in any way proven. The official story is that he committed suicide.
Yeah, and he wouldn't be the first or last person to jump from a high building on some kind of, drug.
Sure.
However,
you have to get a lot of force to propel yourself through glass.
That's right.
All right. Well, okay. What about the Tuskegee experiment?
Right, where a group of people, I forget what state it was in, but they were not given, they had syphilis, but they were not treated to cure the syphilis. They were just studied.
Right, and given placebo medications. These were African-American men in a tremendously racist time in the U.S. past. I know a few of our listeners will say, well, it's tremendously racist today, but that it was very, very openly institutionalized racism to the point where it made it okay from a governmental standpoint to experiment on these black men. And while the U.S.'s official position is that the U.S. admits this incident occurred over a very long period of time, but they say that these guys started out with syphilis and simply were not treated. However, other people, anecdotal reports of people who were involved at the time, say that they were given syphilis.
That makes it so much worse if that's true.
Right, but we did a correction when we first did that episode, and we came back and we said that according to the official government standpoint, which I think is how we phrased it, these people were not given syphilis, they had it already, and they were not treated, which is just as insidious,
right,
and unethical, in my opinion.
Wow.
Oh yeah, and then there's domestic chemical exposures. Speaking of that, that's proven as well. So government agencies would just go to the rooftops of some poor neighborhoods, and they did this more than once, and emit chemicals, to see what happened, to stimulate a widespread chemical exposure.
Yeah, and just, go to the local hospital and find out, well, who came in with what, how many, how did it manifest? Ugh, man.
Oh, yeah, excuse me, listeners. I meant to say simulate, not stimulate. I believe I misspoke there. And of course, we know that warrantless snooping and or surveillance is, I would say, de facto illegal, but other people would say it's de facto legal, being that some of the interpretations of the law remain secret.
Yeah.
Because of
national security. Oh, man. Please don't be drunk right now listening to this.
Yeah. And then, of course, how could we go without mentioning psyops, such as impersonating someone's identity, anonymous harassment, smear campaigns, and all that other stuff. This would be stuff like you mentioned earlier, Matt. What would they do with Martin Luther King's mail?
Oh, well, all kinds of fun things with his mail. They would intercept the mail, like check it out, see what's in there. If there's anything juicy, make copies of things, then put it back in the mail. They would send him threats and things like that in the mail.
They'd impersonate people.
That's what it is. They would impersonate, like, let's say a letter from one of his close contacts that was just seething and mad at him. Or, I think there was one instance where they tried to initiate some kind of affair.
Oh, yeah, I have heard that story, but I haven't looked it up myself.
I don't mean to give out false information. I hope that I'm not, but it's in the back of my head somewhere.
Well, we do know that MLK did have affairs.
Sure.
So it's not out of the realm of possibility, unfortunately. But speaking of the mail, it's time for a break, and we'll be back after word from our sponsor. And we're back. So far, for a quick recap, we have looked at illegal things that government agencies have done in the past. We have looked at things that their monitoring activities. We've looked at infiltration activities, and now it's time to get to the real here's where it gets crazy part. Did a government agency ever run a cult?
So here are some of the alleged examples, Ben. The first one is Jonestown. Now, some people believe that Jim Jones, well, we know that Jim Jones was running a cult.
The People's Temple.
The People's Temple that moved from several places. I can't remember the initial starting place, but I know it moved to California, then
to Guyana.
Yeah. And the theory is that he was running a psychological experiment of mind control on these people, on behalf of the CIA, or at least possibly related somehow to the CIA.
I see. And that's an interesting idea, which we do explore in that video you mentioned earlier, because the People's Temple at the time was a bit unusual in that it actively encouraged acceptance of all creeds, and it was a little bit left-leaning, which would be otherwise the kind of thing that the U.S. government would have closely monitored at that time for possible dissent or a threat to national security.
Well, it's strange to me that it would still be, I guess the reason why it was under CIA, or why it's thought to be under CIA, is because they moved outside of the country. Well,
to Guyana, which was a country in the U.S. sphere of influence.
Sure. But I guess not officially inside the U.S., so it wouldn't be FBI.
Right, yeah. But also, in the evolution of a cult, they may have just moved to a more isolated place to further cement the leader's grip on people.
They had guards, like armed guards.
Increasingly militarized. There were people who wanted to escape. There are some huge unanswered questions to this day, which you and I deal with in the videos, about how stuff went down, how the congressman was killed, how the people were killed who committed suicide, reports of additional people or assets even working to sanitize the operation, and then later painting it as a suicide when it may have been instead, as the theorists would advance, a massacre of a psyop gone wrong. PSYOP rather. I think that's fascinating. At this point, the evidence that you and I could find in there, while tantalizing, was far from certain.
Sure. But there wasn't a CIA agent who was working with Leo, or is his name Leo Ryan?
The congressman. Congressman
Leo Ryan, and then there's Dwyer, Agent Dwyer.
And you can hear on the recording, right, that Jim Jones...
Get Dwyer out of here.
Get Dwyer out of here, yeah. That is true. But at this point, that while that is one of the most popular theories for an intelligence agency running a cult, it is ultimately at this point, it doesn't have solid proof yet.
Sure.
It just has troubling unanswered questions. Can I tell you about one of my favorites?
Oh, I love this one.
All right. This is the idea that Scientology, and we are not calling Scientology a cult, so lawyers, please don't get mad. This is a theory that Matt and I did not make up, that the Church of Scientology is somehow run by an intelligence agency. And this is actually a theory that is kind of more well known in the ex-Scientologist community than it is in the mainstream, never been a Scientologist part of the world. And the idea here is that the current head of Scientology, David Miscavige, is working for the FBI or the CIA, that he is an asset. And you'll see ex-Scientologists who say that they left the organization because Miscavige somehow changed it. And you and I, of course, are not Scientologists, nor have we ever been. We have read about Scientology, but we've also always read about it from the outside in.
Sure.
Little background, you hooked us up with an excellent book that you lent to me earlier, right?
Yes, Going Clear. And I already forgot the author, but it's fantastic. It looks at it from an investigative reporter angle, on all these different angles. And the author allowed Scientology to go in and make footnotes and comment on the entire book.
Right. Yeah. The book itself is on the up and up. It's a great piece of journalism. It does not address this theory. It's more about the evolution of society.
But it does show the change of the church in Scientology when David Miscavige took over.
Right. Yeah. It just makes no claims about this being anything other than a change in leadership. Right. So, it's a popular theory in a small segment of the global population, but, it's a fascinating one, especially when we consider that, the Church of Scientology and the United States government had historically, adversarial relationships.
Yes. Again, detailed in that book quite beautifully.
You can also check out, our video, Operation Snow White. We've got one other, of course. We got to save this guy.
Good old Charlie Manson.
Yep. Maybe nothing good about him, but he is certainly old. The idea is that Manson was groomed by assets of the CIA to perform mind control experiments in the field.
Yes, that would be a good place to do them.
And of course, at this point, apparently, Matt and I believe that these CIA scientists are evil Germans.
Yeah, I didn't want to do a Unit 731 accent.
No.
I can't do those.
Oh, no. That would probably get us in some hot water, but we'll see what comes out of our, cartoonish Indiana Jones German accents. The idea here, though, is fascinating because this is one of those strings that when you pull it, unravels more and more and more stuff. So we know that Charles Manson had some encounters with Dianetics, which was a precursor to Scientology during some of his time in prison and during some of his time in the hippie counterculture, when he also encountered a group called, is it 4Pi?
4Pi is the alleged group.
Yeah, it's Pi, not P2. That's the
It's
Italian
4Pi.
Freemasons. Okay, yes.
Yes, that's the one that David Berkowitz talked about, the Son of Sam killer. And then got his throat cut in prison
And
after talking
refused
about
to
it.
speak again. Right. And there's some, I hate to say it, but there is some really compelling evidence that the Son of Sam did not act alone. Matt, that detective who never gave up, I think he's right.
Yeah.
And this argument here, this goes into the idea that there was, we first found out about it with Son of Sam and Charles Manson, but it ultimately expands into this idea that there is some sort of serial killer cult or some sort of tacit agreement to turn a blind eye to certain unethical experiments or criminal homicidal behavior. Now, of course, in most cases, logically, it doesn't make sense to think that so many people could keep that kind of secret. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, it's a
lot of moving
extraordinary
parts.
claim, yeah.
But
fascinating.
Right. But, Ben, is this conspiracy theory or is it conspiracy fact?
Ah, yes. Okay, well, here's the thing. It's unlikely that an intelligence group, at least the ones we're talking about again in the United States, would manufacture an entire cult.
Yeah, I'm trying to come up with an idea of why you would manufacture an entire cult.
Right. To what end would you do this?
I'm honestly not sure. Unless you wanted a whole colony of Manchurian candidates that you just keep in tiny darkened rooms, but
which I could understand, but it would be so much easier to influence and infiltrate a cult than it would be, you know what I mean?
Right. It's a lot more plausible that would happen because again, if we take the standpoint of one of these groups, CIA or FBI, infiltrating them and keeping tabs on them, that makes perfect sense to me. Controlling one. Rising up the ranks and then controlling one. Now that is interesting.
That's the angle that you and I would take, right?
Yeah.
Not that we have considered that.
No.
But we hope that you guys have enjoyed this episode, and we hope that we have provided enough fascinating things to get you going in different directions. And we want to hear back from you when you come out of the rabbit hole, especially Matt. I'd like to hear about this sort of idea in other cultures and countries. Like we know that China has an adversarial relationship with the Falun Gong cult, which I'm probably mispronouncing. We know that the church and the state in many cases often clash, and in some cases they start to become synchronous. We also know that some quasi-religious groups have been involved heavily in government, like P2, which we earlier, I mentioned it in the wrong spot, but P2 in Italy deserves a mention, right?
Yeah, the propaganda do.
Which would be a Freemason associated group, associated lodge that has a lot of had a lot of fingers in a lot of Italian pies, I guess. They were running, they had an undue influence is what I'm saying.
I get you, man. So what do you think? Is there any one of these topics that you've watched our videos? Maybe you want us to go deeper into any of this? Do you have any opinions about, whether or not you think a cult is being infiltrated and then perhaps is now run by the icy cold hands of the CIA?
Nice imagery.
I'm trying to go more Halloween here. I'm not sure if it's being effective or not, but we're going to keep going with it. But write to us, guys.
Yeah. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Twitter. We have a website called Stuff They Don't Want You to Know, where you can see, all of our videos, all of our podcasts. You occasionally put a blog up there. So check us out there.
And if you want to play Magic with me, I'm on MTGO and I go by conspiracy stuff. Check it out.
Yeah.
Come play a game with me. Come on.
And, ladies and gentlemen, my co-host here is serious about that. He will play Magic the Gathering with you.
And that's the end of this classic episode. If you have any thoughts or questions about this episode, you can get into contact with us in a number of different ways. One of the best is to give us a call. Our number is 1-833-STDWYTK. If you don't want to do that, you can send us a good old-fashioned email. We are
conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.